have unconscious biases? Well, there are apps for that. My name is Leesa Renee Hall, and I help highly sensitive people and deep feelers explore unconscious biases so that they stand on the side of justice and become better ancestors, all while protecting their energy. In a previous teaching, I had shared the concept of what the inner field trip means. And the inner field trip is the name of the method that I use to help those who think deeply, who feel deeply, to be able to unpack their unconscious biases in a way that doesn't overactivate their nervous system. Because I'm all about helping us stay in the work and to be able to find a sustainable practice in challenging our unconscious biases so that we can continue to stand on the side of justice. And so, if we are to become better ancestors, what does that mean? And how can the inner field trip process help us to unpack those unconscious biases so that we can become better ancestors? All right, so I have uncovered that there are 4 types of ancestors, and it follows the acronym FIRE. F-I-R-E. Most people think that to become a better ancestor, that the only way that you can become an ancestor is to give birth to biological children and rear them into adulthood. That's one way. And that's actually the F in FIRE, familial ancestor, where you pass on DNA and ancestral memories. However, there are other things we pass on besides DNA. The I in FIRE is ideological ancestor. That's where you pass on ideas and inventions. Authors fall into this category. People who invent things fall into this category. And so on. The R in FIRE is relational ancestors. That's where you pass on affinities and memberships. So one of the examples I like to use is that I went to university, I graduated, and as an alumni, I get to benefit from some of the deals that my alumni association negotiates so that I can get better rates on home insurance, car insurance, and so on. And then there's the E in FIRE, environmental ancestors. That's where you pass on wisdom from nature. And so some people are really, really smart about celestial bodies and its rhythm. Others understand the secret language of trees and so on. And so that, some and others know plant life, plant stuff. One of my friends shared with me that her great-grandmother had a recipe book, a medicine book of all the plants and how they can be used and mixed so that it can be used as medicine. And she's from Croatia, and she said to me, I didn't know that Croatia had medicine women, and that I'm descended from one, she told me. So that's really cool. So those are the 4 types of ancestors. So given that there's 4 types of ancestors, how can we successfully become 1, 2, or even all of them? We have to unpack our unconscious biases in those specific areas. And so the writing prompts that I've designed to help my patrons and workshop attendees to unpack their unconscious biases using stream of consciousness writing follows the acronym A.P.P.S. As you can notice, I love acronyms. First of all, acronyms are easy to remember, but second of all, it helps me to stay focused. A.P.P.S. And so, if one of the ancestors we can become is a familial ancestor, then to do so, we need to unpack ancestry-based unconscious biases. That's the A in A.P.P.S. Ancestry is the beliefs that we've inherited, the memories we've inherited. If you think about your family members, some of them have maybe strong opinions about money. And if you were to trace it as far back as you can go, you might find an ancestor where there was a traumatic event around money. This is the field of epigenetics, which studies the ways in which memories are passed on from one generation to the next at the cellular level. You can do some research on that. But it's interesting because a granddaughter or great-granddaughter may not have gone through the Holocaust, but somehow has all these strong opinions and strong fears about certain institutions and individuals. And if you trace back, you'll find that her great-grandmother or grandmother was a victim of the Holocaust and has passed on memories and stories about that time that has been inherited by that child. The same is true for any other violent event that affects the family line, whether it's genocide or chattel slavery and so on. And so these are the ways in which, these are some of the ancestral unconscious biases that we need to unpack so that we become familial ancestors. So some ancestry-based unconscious biases are some writing prompts on fatherlessness. That's about an emotionally or physically absent father. There's writing prompts on mom. There are writing prompts on a concept called the parentification of siblings. So that's another writing prompt. Hello. Hi. And that is that's a concept where if you were the eldest sibling in the family, the eldest child, or the only girl of boy siblings, or the eldest cousin, that somehow child rearing was saddled on you. And I read an article that said that those who take care of younger siblings or younger cousins, or just siblings overall, end up becoming perpetual caregivers. So there's a writing prompt around that. There's a writing prompt around what's known as the family shadow. So we have individual shadows that we carry with us, and that's the part of us that we repress and we ignore. I call it the inner oppressor. Others call it, Jen Postoloff, who wrote the best-selling book on being human, calls it your inner asshole. Some call it the inner critic. And for most of us, we have our individual shadow, and then there's a shadow that clings to your lineage, generation after generation after generation. So there's 7 family shadows. And so there's a writing prompt that helps you identify which shadow clings to your bloodline, like a bad odor, and then some writing prompts to help you to work through that. So that's those are some of the writing prompts available to help you unpack ancestry-based unconscious biases so that you can become a better familial ancestor. Now, in order to become an ideological ancestor, we have to unpack productivity-based unconscious biases. So what does that mean? Because we live in a society that equates labor with action, where we trade our labor for money, we have developed some unhealthy work habits. This idea that you have to stay at the office really late in order to be seen and then be promoted, or giving up your weekends for work, not going on holidays. You know, all of these are productivity-based unconscious biases. And so in order to open up the space so that you can be creative and come up with something that can benefit future generations, you have to unpack those type of unconscious biases that tie you to or make you believe that your labor is the only thing that matters. So I have writing prompts that cover sleep, our attitudes around sleep. I have a really good one about perfection and how being perfect robs us of our ability to make mistakes, which is where we learn. I mean, when you're innovating something, you have to make mistakes. That's the only way that you can come up with the best product. Other writing prompts are available to help you unpack productivity-based unconscious biases are ones around I'm going off of memory, being picky and what that means. There's also unconscious biases around productivity. So our attitudes towards sleep, our attitudes towards being picky, maybe toxic traits that we may have. Also about speaking wisely and taking up space. What have we been told about those things? And so when we can unpack our productivity based unconscious biases, that helps us to open up, again, our creativity and to acknowledge that sleep and being silent and still, that's another writing prompt, that these are some of the things that we need to do so that we can then become ideological ancestors. All right. The second P in A.P.P.S is privilege. And in order for us to become relational ancestors, we need to unpack our privilege-based unconscious biases. Privilege isn't just around skin color privilege. We live in a society and in a culture that rewards those with light or white skin. And so that's one aspect of privilege. But another aspect of privilege is also body size. It's also religion. So I have a writing prompt called Recovering from Religion. Other types of privilege is who leads you in the workplace. And so I have a writing prompt that asks the question, have you ever been led by a person of color? Other forms of privilege are also language spoken. I have a writing prompt about patriotism and what it means to sing the songs of sing the national anthem of the country where you were born or currently reside. We also talk about mascots and costumes and cultural appropriation, so there's writing prompts around that as well. Because as a relational ancestor, you can pass on memberships in clubs or communities that can be very destructive. And so we want to be able to unpack the unconscious biases so that we become relational ancestors that pass on affinities and memberships that are not predicated on the disadvantage of others. And finally, the S in A.P.P.S is sustainability. If you want to become an environmental ancestor, you need to unpack unconscious biases that have to do with your relationship to nature. And so I have writing prompts that cover, there's one for summer, the season. There's another writing prompt around your attitude to winter. Writing prompts around spring and fall. There's a writing prompt called The Wisdom of Trees, I absolutely love. Land acknowledgements, that's another writing prompt that is there. Diversity outdoors is another writing prompt. How do you feel about seeing Black, Indigenous, and people of color outdoors? And so those are some of the writing prompts available under the sustainability, oh my gosh, say that 10 times. Those are some of the writing prompts available under the sustainability category. And if you can unpack your unconscious biases that you may have towards nature and the environment and the climate, then you too can become an environmental ancestor. And so, do you have unconscious biases? Well, there's apps for that. And the way to get some of these writing prompts is multiple ways. I have a blog post called exploringbias.com. If you go there, there are 9 complimentary, 9 free writing prompts. Go through them. And if you like the idea of writing and using stream of consciousness writing to get your ideas out, then you can become a patron in my community on Patreon. And there I deliver some new writing prompts, usually once or twice a month. And you will be able to use them to work through some of these unconscious biases so that you can become a better ancestor. And also look for the card deck that will be available. And we're also going to implement some small groups in cities around the world where my patrons are gathered, and you would be able to join them to be able to do the inner field trip with others. However you unpack your unconscious biases, whether you use my writing prompts or if you use some other method, just note that if you are highly sensitive, if you're a deep feeler or a deep thinker, find a way that helps you to confront your toxic thoughts and your unconscious biases in a way that doesn't overstimulate your nervous system so that you can continue to stand on the side of justice. Stumble bravely.